welcome everyone. Today we have another new episode, and this episode based on reduced carbon footprint. And we have our expert panelists, Madam Viva, Professor David, Mr. Alex. We have Madam Beth and Professor David. So I want to start from Madam Viva. Like, how do you want to introduce this point as your company is also working this reduced carbon footprint and these issues with our audience?
Okay, we are a private corporation that is working with a technology that's very simple and easy to adopt that helps Mother Nature's geochemistry by raising the level of the hydroxyl radical in the atmosphere, which is ancient chemistry. And we know that since it's been working for thousands of years already in the background, that it's very safe, and all of the breakdown products from it, humanity and other living creatures can tolerate that level working in the background. Because of the elevated level of greenhouse gases that we have now, the hydroxyl that's in the background naturally is overwhelmed. So we're bringing to the table the ability to help nature along rather than arm wrestle her to the ground. So that's what our technology is about, and it's very easy and low tech to adopt. And it comes in at an affordable price at about $10 a CO2 equivalent, which is lower than some of the other companies that are in our field. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Professor David. How do you want to introduce this problem and solution, especially reduce carbon footprints?
Well, first off, I'm very happy to hear what our previous speaker had to say, because that's right in line with the kind of things that I'm interested in. My background is science, health, and technology. And of course, I'm active with the transhumanist movement in the United States and around the world. And one of the things that we advocate is taking hold of our future and using techniques that we can for mitigation, things that we can do to decrease the current problem that we might have, but most of all, keep our optimism and keep our focus on what we can do to change the world in a positive way as we move forward. So I'm really excited about today's conversation. It's getting started off on just the right foot as far as I'm concerned.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, sir. Mr. Alex, how do you want to introduce today's problems and what the solution we can think and what will happen next few years?
Yes, good morning, everyone. So I am really excited about this topic, today's conversation. This is a very important topic. Lowering our carbon footprint or lowering our individual carbon footprint is one of the huge solutions to solving anthropogenic global warming and climate change. So there's different ways to look at it. So we could talk about lowering our collective carbon footprint or lowering our individual carbon footprint. You know, it's all important. And then there's also the environmental impact, which is directly related to environmental degradation and, you know, lowering the damage that we're causing on Earth. So if we break it down into a couple categories as well, so we're talking about lowering our carbon footprint, or you know, our societies or civilizations. But then there's the other aspect where we are trying to do to solve climate change and all of this is carbon sequestration, and that has to do with planting more trees, composting, trying to have healthier soil, trying not to spray Roundup on everything, so everything dies, because we're trying to find ways to sequester carbon and ways to lower our environmental impact and our carbon footprint. So those are two categories. So we're trying to solve it on both fronts, you know, both aspects. So collectively, our society has to lower its carbon footprint. So that's to reduce carbon emissions by everyone around the world. Some countries have a higher carbon footprint than other countries, you know, depending on, you know, lifestyle choices, what they do, where they go, how much, you know, they drive, how much meat they eat, all of those different factors. So I I've had this conversation with people about, trying to get more people in America to be environmental or to watch what they, where they go, what they eat, how they choose to live their life. And I, as an environmentalist doing this for 2 decades, I always hear people say, yeah, well, there's so many people in China or India or Africa, they're causing all the damage. So it's not necessarily true. So the environmental impact or carbon footprint of like one American, I don't have the statistics, but it's so many times greater than the people in Africa and Asia and different places like that. So if we are all more environmentally conscious here in the United States, we would solve a lot of the issues. And it's because, well, one of the reasons people in the United States, they go on all these luxury cruises. They have, 5 houses and 6 cars and all this stuff they just don't need. Consumerism is a huge problem. So when you think about reducing your carbon footprint, there's different categories. I just searched on WikiHow. I love WikiHow. It's so easy to find simple stuff. So it says drive less, use less water, recycle, heat your home efficiently, buy secondhand goods, swap out your light bulbs, eat less meat, replace old appliances. So those are all important things. If you are going to replace your appliances, I would recommend switching out to Energy Star. If you are going to eat less meat, or even if you're choosing between meat, I would choose chicken instead of beef. The environmental impact of chicken is much, much less than beef. I try to buy stuff in secondhand stores just so it doesn't go into a landfill. So that's a good way to lower your carbon footprint. Of course, recycling, but recycling isn't available to a lot of people around the world. When I was in Ghana, there was no recycling. New Orleans here in the United States, places in Florida just don't have recycling. It's really frustrating. So of course, driving less and using less water. So anytime that we use less resources, we use less energy. So when we waste food, we waste energy. When we take long showers, we waste energy. So just everything that we do uses energy and resources in some way. I love that we now have Google Earth and Google Maps. So when we drive from point A to point B, we're not getting lost and we can be more efficient with our time. So that's what we're trying to do. And technology is helping us be efficient. Software, AI, automation, just learning consistent and reliable forms of transportation. Our society needs to be more efficient, and we're working towards that. We're headed in the right direction. We just need more people to be knowledgeable and aware of some of the things they can do individually. So I'll go ahead and pass it off to the rest of the panelists.
Thank you, Madam. Yes, Madam Beth. But even we are observing from the report that in COVID situation, actually, like carbon footprint reducing because of COVID, because many things stop right now. So what your observation, even after 1970s, UK reduced this carbon footprint. I think this is also they introducing green technology. So what the analysis you want to share with our audience?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me today, Sharif. And I share David's optimism, but I also fluctuate between optimism and despair, because we have a very short time frame if we're going to avoid the point of no return on the climate. What's happening is we have a certain carbon budget, right? And once we surpass that budget, once we have too much carbon in the atmosphere, it's unlikely that anything that humans do will actually stop the complete catastrophe from occurring. And scientists don't really know what that's going to look like, because there's all these feedback loops. So for instance, right now we know that as the polar ice caps are melting and that white reflective surface is getting smaller and the dark oceans are getting larger, then the oceans are absorbing more heat. So that adds to more warming of the atmosphere. But I still remain optimistic, because I do believe there are solutions. I love the book Drawdown. It focuses on solutions, and it has 100 solutions, most of which are already happening. But it talks about how if we took a particular solution, whether it be electric cars or reforesting, as Alex was talking about, or changing our diets, if we took that particular solution and we changed this much, we increased our implementation of that solution a particular amount, how much could we expect to draw down or stop from going into the atmosphere? And my organization, Eat for the Earth, works primarily on global diets, and particularly in the countries that Alex was referencing, in high meat consuming countries, in high animal product consuming countries. This is an area of great promise. The book Drawdown says that it's the fourth most impactful solution. If even 50% of the world's people shifted to a plant-strong diet, it doesn't even have to be plant-based, though plant-based is the diet that you can adopt that will have the least impact on both the climate crisis and so many other environmental issues. But if 50% of the people went to a plant-strong diet, then that would be the fourth most impactful solution of all of the solutions in the book in terms of how much greenhouse gases it could draw down from the environment and or keep in the ground. And I think a really important distinction for people to understand is that it's not just our carbon footprint, it's our overall total greenhouse gas emissions footprint. And some of these greenhouse gases are much, much more potent than carbon dioxide. Yes, perfect slide. For instance, methane, which is primarily the largest emitter of methane in the world, is ruminant livestock, cows, sheep, goats. And methane is 86 times as potent as carbon dioxide. Nitrous oxide, which is primarily from fertilizers that are put on fields to grow feed for animals to feed to humans, is almost 300 times as potent in how much it warms the earth, unit per unit, as carbon dioxide. And black soot, which is a lot of it is from burning the rainforests, again, to grow cattle or to grow soy to feed to pigs in Asia. This greenhouse gas, black soot, black carbon, is thousands of times more potent than greenhouse gas. But the really good news, if we go back to this optimism, is that if we change our diets, we draw down the greenhouse gases rather quickly, because those are short-lived greenhouse gases. They don't stay in the atmosphere as long as carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide in the atmosphere right now, some of it was put there 10,000 years ago. So the changes we make right now in carbon dioxide, those are important. Don't get me wrong, those are important. But some of this carbon dioxide that we're emitting today will still be here in 10,000 years, too late to prevent runaway global warming. So let's bring down those shorter-lived greenhouse gas emissions by changing our diets, both through the individual action and through enough of us acting individually and demanding that the dietary measures be part of our government's plans, so that we're doing top down and bottom up, because that's the way we can create the change.
Thank you. Professor Donalds, as you are a researcher, I'm trying to share one of the specific analysis, just some specific analysis, what we are observing from global footprint networks. And we are observing China 33.4%, United States 15.6%, India 6.3%, Russia 27.2%. Even we are observing Japan, Germany, Mexico, and there are many big players. Rest of the world only 1.5%. So maximum developed nations and China, they are actually creating this problem. So how do you want to create a awareness, especially for the developed nation?
Well, you know that my thing that I'm interested in is sociology and social science, and that covers the issue of how people are going to behave. And there's a huge amount of inertia that we've developed, path dependencies. Like, we made one decision that caused us to make another decision, and it's kind of hard to unwind it all. And it's all like getting people to change, like what it is in their social structure, like how that person is going to be perceive themselves and perceive others, is it's something that takes thousands and thousands of years to develop within a culture. It's not something that we can change overnight. And I think that people feel, if people have a nice house and they have a car and they have enough to eat and all those kinds of things, they often feel better about themselves. And it's not just in the United States, it's everywhere. And so problem is right now is that we need energy to do that, and oil and gas are the cheapest, most effective type of energy source that we've ever found up till now. And so transitioning from one to the other is like, some people really don't like it. I mean, it's hard for them to do, and it's difficult for them to do, and to explain to them something that's very abstract, like what's going to be happening in previous years, has turned out to be kind of difficult. Certainly in the United States, there's a huge contingent of people who simply refuse to even consider the idea. In fact, we've got a senator from Oklahoma, James Inhofe, who brought a snowball to Congress to prove, or the Senate, to prove that global warming wasn't happening. And he wrote a book that God had promised that he wouldn't flood the earth again, so therefore the oceans couldn't be rising. And so therefore global warming, the whole idea of global warming was a fraud. And so it's called motivated reasoning, where people look at something and they pick out the elements of it to confirm what it is that they want to do. So overall, that's a big issue. But I'm super interested in the science. I'm really interested in how the hydroxyl radicals could be used and how enough of them could be generated to make an impact on, the whole global atmosphere. And that's really fascinating. I looked at the EPA carbon emissions, and about 10% of it is agriculture. So I think that might just be CO2, and they're leaving out the other things like methane and things like that, which is, as Beth pointed out, are significantly worse greenhouse gases than carbon dioxide. So I'm really interested in learning from everyone else. I think Alex has been really trying hard to get people to change their behavior, and I don't know how easy that is to do, but we've got to stop using petroleum, and that's just the way it is. But right now, after Fukushima, the Japanese closed their nuclear plants and they're building coal plants to replace them right now. And coal is, in my opinion, much worse. Like, there's new kinds of nuclear plants that are use salt, molten salt, so they can't melt down because they have to be hot. And so there's a lot of solutions, but people don't want to change.
Thank you, sir. Madam Brenda, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay,
Hello.
thank you. Yes. We want to know more about your South African present conditions and what's going on, and what kind of initiative actually South African government taking regarding this carbon footprint and these issues.
First of all, thank you for being here. I'm hoping to learn from the experts around the table, because I'm not an expert at this. But I am a risk manager, and I'm always looking at some of these threats and opportunities that are out there. And as far as the carbon footprint is concerned, South Africa has got a huge reliance on coal. So that in itself is putting it at risk. If you look at the global stats, it is the 14th of the greenhouse gas emitters when you look at the global stats. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done here in order to ensure that we contain this risk, we manage it properly. The one thing that I find to be the biggest issue, especially in the African countries, South Africa in particular, when you look at so you look at the government, but you also look at the private sector, you also look at individuals or the communities. I think the biggest issue is lack of education and awareness to say, what is this? What does it mean? What are the effects of it? and what does it mean long term? So even though at government level or at policy level, people understand what it is and what the impact is, I don't think at implementation level there's that commitment and there's that intentional or political, I don't even want to call it political will, but there's no will to enforce or implement some of these things. There's always something that has got more priority or something that is more important than looking at sustainability. So I think it is something that needs proper awareness to be created, and not only at the people at the top. You need to do it to the different corporates, not only the big corporates, because they are more worried about the reputational damage that comes with them not complying. So you end up dealing with people just complying and not committed. So people are just ticking boxes. They're not doing it for the good of humanity. So I think there's still a long way to go. So if I look at government, for example, there's a plan that has been put in place. There's commitment that has been made. But if you look at the KPIs and you look at what has been done year on year, it really, they're not meeting the targets. All that happens is that next year they readjust, and then there's no movement. So if you've got a 10-year plan, you'll get to the 10 years, but you're still looking like you had a 2-year plan, because there's the bit of work that you have done. So from where I'm sitting, there's a lot of education that needs to happen, and there's action plans that needs to be put in place to ensure that we really, really manage this stress the way it's supposed to be managed. And all of these things that we are dependent on, like your coal and things that we can get rid of, we need to find a way of just making sure that it happens. If I look at what happened in 2022 when people were staying at home and not going to work and all of that, people were very happy to flesh out their reports as far as carbon footprint is concerned and all of that, as far as their employees are concerned. But they were not talking about what they are doing internally to ensure that we reach the target, or they reach the target that they set for themselves.
Thank you. Madam Viva, there are a few questions from audience. I want to take some question from audience. Mr. Shahrukh, his question is that, how can I estimate the trend of carbon emissions, in particularly carbon footprint? So Madam Viva and Professor David.
One of the best ways is to use some of the carbon tracking sites that are online. You can actually just type in, assess my personal carbon footprint, and you'll get some pretty credible tracking software that will help you go through a survey of your lifestyle, and then it'll tell you how many tons per year you will have of CO2 equivalents. For example, in Canada, the average carbon footprint of a Canadian is about 9 to 11 tons a year, but and it'll tell you that you need to be below 5 or even well under 5. So that would be one way that you could determine your own personal carbon footprint.
Thank you, Professor David. Do you want to analyze some point that how we can estimate the trend of carbon emissions?
Yes, I think that's really a good idea, that each one of us look at ourselves to do this, as well as speaking out for others. Sometimes it can be easy to do that, or at least sometimes it can be made easy. For example, I live in the U.S. state of Arizona, which has abundant sunshine. So it was quite an obvious improvement for me to have solar panels, for example, installed on my roof. With that comes my use of analytical software through a website, through the company where I had the solar panels put in. I can analyze exactly how much energy they are creating and what the carbon offset is. So that's something that's been done very easily for me. In other areas, as far as an analytical approach, I look to people that do this as their profession and look for the tools that they use and take that information. But that comes to, I think, maybe the critical issue that we're talking about here. I noticed a common thread in what people were talking about, and that was that we need to change and the societal impact of change, whether it be something like putting solar panels on your roof or eating less meat, especially red meat, for example. All those things require change, and they require a change throughout society, and it starts with the individual. So, how do we change? Typically, people change when there is some pressure, some pain that causes them to want to go in a different direction. So, as Professor Donald was saying, when people are comfortable, they have the lifestyle that they want, they don't feel that impetus perhaps to change. And then others may try to point out the change to them in very realistic but shocking terms to those people to try to cause that pain of change. And that can lead to a despair, or in some cases, what we see is people will block that and it becomes a point of denial. I don't want to change. I see the data in front of me and either I don't believe it or I'm so shocked by it that that I can't take any action and we get to despair. So I think being comfortable is a problem. I think panic or denial is a problem. And then balancing short term versus long term can be a problem. I have been involved in a number of businesses and run a couple of small businesses myself in light of everything else that I do. And there's always this tendency to emphasize short term results over long term planning. That made me aware that that becomes true in my life as well. I'm worried about making sure that whether it's meeting payroll in a business or meeting my own financial obligations for this month and next month may become more important than what's down the road. So that those are also inhibiting change. So I said I was an optimist. How do we go about changing that? I think the single best thing that we can do to change that is critical thinking, is to teach critical thinking. Recently in the news, matter of fact, I'll post that in the chat, Finland was given very good marks in the European community for what they have done. I'll put it in the private chat first.
Mm-hmm.
As far as teaching critical thinking starting as young as in the elementary schools, the very early ages of schools, and starting out doing that in like a comic book style or something of that nature, and then moving forward as people go through the education system. Because I'm a big proponent in education, and I'm also a big proponent in self-education, of which I've done a lot. But you need to be able to ferret out what is real and what is somebody else's delusion, or worse yet, perhaps even propaganda. So what does that have to do with measuring carbon? I think it comes back to the critical question of, do we have an issue that we can track? How do we go about taking that information and making it something that's actionable in our life and being able to work with others to get that done? And I think critical thinking is one of the biggest parts of that. And it's one of the things that I now talk about as much as I can for whoever will listen.
Thank you, thank you, Madam Beth. There are a few other questions. I think it's almost same nature. I'm just introducing their questions. Taharina, her question is that my question: is there any method available to measure the carbon footprints of food. I think already you give some answer in the in our Facebook group, but Labib question: what are the tools and applications to calculate, model, or estimate ecological footprint, biocapacity, and carbon footprint? So yes, Madam Beld.
Thank you, Sharif, and thank you for those excellent questions. Yes, my area of expertise is more on the food, so I can answer that one better. So yes, as Rita was saying earlier, or Viva was saying earlier, there are calculators online that you can use, and I'll find one and put it in the Facebook chat. But there are calculators you can use to estimate what your footprint is for your food, and the principles to keep in mind is that producing any food is going to create greenhouse gas emissions, and the greenhouse gas emissions are going to be created along the line of production to consumption. So they're going to be greenhouse gases produced by what's being produced, what the food item is, how it's produced, where it's grown, how it gets to you, how it's prepared, even, and
Packaging.
and even how it's consumed and how much you consume, because the waste is a consideration as well. If all of those greenhouse gas emissions and other important environmental inputs and outputs along the chain of production, if all of those were wasted, then all of those greenhouse gas emissions didn't even feed anybody. So you have to consider that there's a whole chain. But what we know is that the hugest percentage of that, and I don't remember the specific percent, but it's up in the 80 or 90% of that emission footprint is from what is grown rather than where, how, or any of the other things along the chain. So there are very few exceptions, but for the most part, all animal foods are going to have a higher carbon equivalent footprint than all plant foods. The exceptions would be like if you're eating asparagus that was flown on a plane from another continent, that is going to have a very high footprint, but still not as high as beef grown in your neighborhood, even if it's grown organically. In fact, organic beef, by some analysis, grass-fed organic beef, is worse in terms of its carbon footprint. So what you eat is the most important. So it's important for people to eat as many plants as possible, as they're comfortable with. The whole world doesn't need to go vegan, but we need to, as a global human family, we need to reduce our overall consumption of animal products. And I think and especially in the parts of the world where we eat more than our fair share. I want to answer a couple of things that were spoken earlier, like the idea of what was the question? The percentages of animal agriculture. Donald, you cited a source that said agriculture, not animal, but agriculture is only 10% of greenhouse gas emissions. Well, this is a very contested figure. I mean, even the lowest figure that's from a government or peer-reviewed source, 14.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions from animal agriculture. That's from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United States, which is a group that works for farmers. Okay, so it's a very conservative figure. There's good research that shows as high as 51%. But the important question is not how much. I think we get tripped up in trying to figure out the percentage. The important question is not how much of a percentage it is, but for people to really understand the critical point, which is that even if we reduce our emissions from fossil fuels to zero, we are not going to avoid that point of no return without also changing global human diets. And that source that I posted on the Facebook page, that is one of the many scientific research projects that's coming out in the last 5 or so years that are coming to that same conclusion, that we must change global human diets. And the other point was was the different countries and how much they're contributing. Well, in the area of diet, again, my area of expertise in the area of food-based emissions, if the world ate the way the United States does, that's the country where I live, if the whole world ate the way the United States did, right now, with the amount of people we have on the earth, it would take 1.37 Earths, that's 137% of all the land surface on Earth, all the surface that's currently forests, deserts, whatever, cities, all of that, to grow enough food to feed the world the way people in my country eat. So this is a heads up to those of you in the United States and who eat similarly to how we do. We're eating more than our fair share. So so the most important thing people can do if they're concerned about their footprint from their food, or if they are concerned about making it at all, is we must eat more plants and less animal products.
Thank you, ma'am. Professor Donald, unmute, please.
The little button was hiding there. It took me a minute to find it. Well,
okay.
I think I was looking up some of the things that it's funny. Last night I used a carbon calculator to figure out my carbon footprint. It's one of the interesting things I find on this show is that we get quite a few people, or we've had several people who just hate cities. And they just really strongly believe that the best thing to possibly do is for everyone to get out of cities. However, when that happens, you have to ask yourself the question of how are people going to get from wherever they are to wherever they need to go? And transportation is I absolutely believe, Beth, that the numbers that we get are probably, motivated by somebody saying that, well, we're more or we're less. But in the EPA, on the EPA site, transportation is one of the largest areas of energy use, or carbon fuel energy use. And when we get into cities, we can have public transportation. So when I look myself up, and I look myself up living in Santa Cruz, and then I look myself up living in Palo Alto, and I look myself up living in Chinatown in San Francisco, the amount of energy I used was like 4 times as much in Santa Cruz. And that's simply because in Chinatown has a walk score of 99. And if you're not familiar with walk score and you live in the United States, if there's anybody here from the United States listening, it's a website that you can go to, walkscore.com, and it tells you how easy it would be to live without a car where you particularly are. And I can't drive, so I have to live in a place where I can walk and do my daily life. And Chinatown has a 99% walk score, which means basically that you can do absolutely everything you need to do by walking. And it's true with a lot of, New York City, all the cities. So anyway, I just want people to consider that public transportation is like a gold thing for reducing greenhouse gases. And in the United States, there's a lot of people that are absolutely dead set against it. They say, what, people aren't using it, so we shouldn't invest in it. And you get into a catch-22 situation because people can't use it because it doesn't exist. And since it doesn't, so people won't put any money into doing it because nobody uses it, but they can't use it because it isn't there. So I'm a very strong proponent of trying to increase awareness about public transportation, which is one of the things that we need to create awareness about.
Thank you. Mr. Alex.
Yes, I apologize, everyone. You could hear me okay, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I lost internet at my Scotts Valley home in the mountains, so back down here. I just heard Donald talking about public transportation. I'm also a strong supporter of public transportation. I didn't own a vehicle for about 7 years, and I just didn't even want anything to do with a vehicle until the beginning of this pandemic. And I thought it was probably a good idea to have a vehicle, because of safety reasons, and it just would have made my life easier. And I did get a Prius used. So the carbon footprint of this Prius is much lower. I do want to, point out and recommend, appreciate the public transportation system in Europe and some of the other countries around the world that are just taking, the resources and the attention that it needs to have a good public transportation system. A couple years ago, I went through 11 European countries, mostly Scandinavia, just really impressed with the public transportation system. And for some reason, we just can't really figure it out here in America, with the Hyperloop and a good system. I was in San Jose, Silicon Valley, and I was really disappointed and shocked with how their public transportation system works. So at one point, I was catching a flight to some country for some humanitarian mission, and I was taking some of the buses, and I had to take one bus to okay, so anyways, I had to take multiple buses to go a really short distance just to get to the airport, and it didn't make any sense to me. So I asked the bus driver, why do I have to take all these buses just to go right there? It just didn't make any sense. So he explained to me that there's all these divisions and little counties, little areas where the bus only goes to a certain distance, and then you got to get to another bus to get to another region or district. And I asked him, I'm like, isn't that really inefficient? Wouldn't it make more sense for all the districts to work together so you take one bus across two districts? And he said, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, but you just stay within your district of Silicon Valley. It was just the most inefficient thing that I've ever heard of, and I hope San Jose changes that. So efficiency is really important. Public transportation system, I hope that we're working towards solutions with this pandemic and keeping people safe. I am excited about the Hyperloop and the potential that has, not just for transporting people, but also transporting goods. And I did just mention flying. So as an environmentalist, I'm really cautious with where I go, how I choose to spend my money, how I choose to spend my time. And when I have left the country, it has been for something really important. Usually it's just for a humanitarian mission or a major environmental impact. For instance, a couple years ago, I did speak at a UN climate change conference in Vienna, Austria. So instead of just flying to Vienna, Austria for this, 2-week-long conference, I stayed in Europe and I did other stuff while I was there for 6 months and then came back. So I try to make the trip. So it's way more energy efficient if you go somewhere, stay there longer, do what you can. But not just that, there's ways to offset your carbon footprint of the trip, regardless if you're taking a cruise, a flight, even a drive. So I know there's a lot of resources. If you Google search offset carbon for a flight, the last few times I've used Delta, it just shows that if you enter in how many miles your flight is, you can pay or donate a specific amount of money. Usually it's only $5 to $15 for an international flight. And what they do with that money, it goes to nonprofits. It might be educating women about birth control or different pregnancy things. It might go towards people that are learning how to build rocket stoves and be more efficient with their burning trees and their fuel consumption, or it actually goes to planting trees. So it shows different categories of where that money's going. So I like offsetting my flights the very few times that I do choose to fly for different reasons. So I thought I'd add that to the conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Alex. Madam Viva and Professor David, actually, there are many questions regarding these calculations. Abir asked, what is the best methodology of calculate carbon footprint for a private business? How to calculate carbon footprint manually for bricks of different materials. I think this session's very important because it's create very good awareness. So they have many questions on that particular point. So Madam Viva and Professor David, yes.
The concept of embedded emissions is very important to understand. So from the source to the end user, you're going to have different stages of transport, packaging, creation, anywhere where you're using fossil fuel. Now, the governments have gotten this whole idea of the carbon footprint down to quite a science. For example, in Canada, the federal government has openly stated that they know that the emissions gap, which is the amount of carbon that has accumulated in the atmosphere that fits in with the Paris goals is 64 million tons. So that's Canada's emissions gap for that goal. So governments have developed a real science in calculating the carbon footprint of different fuels for different fleets and that kind of thing. And it's the same type of objective approach that a business should use as well, to go right back to the original source of their raw material and find out what's being expended there in terms of greenhouse gases, all your packaging, your warehousing, the heating for the buildings that are used to house the product as it moves through your supply chain. So there is a science in logistics that is addressing that now more formally. So I would say that a good example is a government who is very clear on what the emissions gap is for their country, has already got a lot of the scientific approach for determining specific phases of a supply chain that can be mimicked in business as well too. They just, it's already been pioneered, so it's a good area to look at and learn from, to understand how you can, as a business, also conduct a supply chain embedded emissions evaluation.
Thank you. Professor David.
That's a terrific explanation, and I'm not sure that I can improve on it, but that won't keep me from talking, of course. I think that one of the things that, as important as it is to know the details of what carbon footprint is for yourself and for your business, is to not let that immobilize you if you don't have all the detailed information that you want. One of the things that I myself do is I want good quantitative information, but I have to be careful not to get tripped up in the details, not to become so myopic in the details that keeps me from moving forward, going to do what I need to do. So I'd already spoke a little bit about some of the things that I've done myself. Professor Donald talked about not having a car. One of the things that I recently did was decided to sell my car, and I haven't replaced it. Here in the state of Arizona, we've been hit pretty hard by COVID-19, and it has taught me a lot of things. Instead of focusing on the negative aspect of the COVID, I'm thinking, what can I learn from this? And I've learned that I can drive much less, that when I do need to go places, that I can be more efficient in maybe stringing errands or so forth together to get those done. Public transportation here is not good. So some of our friends have entered into like ride sharing agreements, and there's been other people that have sold their cars during this time as well. So fuel for cars, we've talked about petrol, but just energy in general, I think is a big indicator of what your carbon footprint is going to be. Common sense says drive less, demand less from energy resources, most of which are not all that environmentally friendly, and we make our situation better as we go. It comes down, I think, to ingenuity, innovation, and yes, even entrepreneurship, looking at how can I provide a service that helps people reduce their carbon footprint and make them feel good about it. And it goes back to this change. It makes change then easier for people to do. So by talking among your friends and sharing the things that you do helps. And I'm also a member of a political party, so I use this information to press local and state and national officials about things that we can do, because when they're pressured to change, to stay in office or to get into office comes upon them, then it makes it easier to change. The more discussion that we have, I say this often, but what we're doing in shows like this and other places that I appear, I think is very important, because it helps drive the momentum in the direction that we want to go. So measuring is important, but please don't let that keep you from taking steps to make changes that you know that are going to positively impact and help others feel better about making the kind of changes that we all want to see happen.
Thank you, sir. There are a few more questions I want to take from audience. One is Humaira Tanzila. Hello, everyone. It's a major issue in today's world. What are the recycling methods to reduce carbon footprint? Thank you. And another things he wants to know, how can carbon footprinting be integrated into the curriculum? I think how we can integrate these things in our education system. So, Madam Beth and Professor Donalds, yeah. Madam Beth,
Can
unmute,
you,
please. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I forgot the first question already. Can you remind me the first one?
Yes.
Oh, the
What are the
recycling.
methods?
Yeah. Yeah, so so one thing I would say on the topic of recycling is to start with reducing. You know, we forget the reducing. There, what was it? Reduce, reuse, recycle. Recycle is the last thing in terms of what we can do to reduce our contribution to the excess resource use and waste in our countries. So we want to start by reducing, and then reusing, and then recycling. And we have much more of an impact through reduction than any of the others. So if I don't, like for instance, I have a gas powered vehicle, but it's a 1994 car, and it still gets me down the road. So if I were to throw that car away to get an electric vehicle before it's used up its life, then I'm contributing to all of the materials that went into it not finishing its life, and to all the materials in the new car. So even though, you know, it's not very, it doesn't look very elegant, and people might think, you know, that I'm poor or something, I'm still driving that car because I want to reduce my consumption. I want to reduce what I purchase. So somebody mentioned earlier, go to thrift stores. If I buy a dress at a thrift store, then I'm not contributing to all of the ways that the production of that dress hurt the environment, whether it be the emissions, the water use, the land use, et cetera, et cetera. So the first step is reduce. And, you know, governments want to talk about unlimited growth. This is what Greta Thunberg took issue with the United Nations. Like, governments want to talk about unlimited growth and how we need to grow our economies. But what we need to do as individuals is actually buy less and buy more strategically. Buy those things that were made well, that are going to last a long time, that have a low carbon footprint, a low water footprint, a low land footprint, et cetera. And then the second part is reuse. So, you know, once a t-shirt is worn out, turn it into a bag that you can take with you when you go shopping. So, and then, you know, so reuse your things, be creative about how you reuse. If you're serious about wanting to reduce your impact on our earth and on the livability of our earth, because that's what we're talking about here. The earth is fine, the earth will heal, but whether we'll be able to continue living here or not is the question that we're talking about today. So then finally recycle. And as to like, what are the best methods for recycling? You know, we have to use what's available in our communities. And so, you know, we're at the mercy of what's available, except to the extent that we can be entrepreneurial ourselves and create new systems. One of the things that has happened is China used to take much of the plastic waste of the world, and China is no longer taking as much waste. So our landfill in Santa Cruz, even though we still sort the plastic recycling out, it's not going anywhere. It's sitting at the landfill, becoming a bigger and bigger pile, emitting more and more emissions. So that's why I say the important thing is reduce, and then reuse, and then recycle. And I'm sorry, the second question? What was the second question?
Like how we can integrate this process in our education system.
Yeah, so I'm excited about that, but I also don't want to take up too much space. But yeah, I think it needs, I agree with the comment that was made earlier about start with the young people. And, you know, let's create tools that make it accessible. So for instance, I created a tool, an online tool where people can calculate the water in their sandwich. So there's a menu of different choices of what you can put in your sandwich, and their pictures, right? And I'll find it and I'll post a link to it. But I did all the research. I found the figures for, you know, how much the slice of beef would be, or the slice of cheese, or the slice of tofu, and the wheat bread versus the white bread versus the lettuce leaf. And then people can just plug that all in and find out how much water. I'll do one for the carbon equivalent footprint at some point, but I started with water. And, you know, people are stunned to find out that it takes over 1,000 gallons of water to create one sandwich, right? So we need to have creative tools like this that break it down, that make it accessible for all ages, to be able to understand that the way we're living on the earth has an impact. And the good news is we can change the way we're living. And I agree with Donald that human nature makes it difficult to change unless we're up against the wall. That's why I got so excited when I saw people changing last year when COVID hit, right? I saw that people were changing our behavior and that governments were taking swift action to put in place policies. So what I think the first step is we need to make it really clear that there's imminent danger here, because when people saw the imminent danger to their communities and themselves of COVID, they took action, they stayed home, they stopped driving, et cetera, right? So the task is on us to help people understand that this crisis, that was true, because there's so many environmental crises, but in particular, the climate crisis is a much bigger threat to our communities, to our health, to our well-being, to the possibility of us continue living on Earth than is COVID. So that's what I have to say is, like, let's get people to understand that it's a big problem, and then we can start creatively educating people at all levels to understand that it's a big problem and what they can do.
Thank you, ma'am. Professor Donald, yes. Please unmute yourself.
I want to start out by mentioning that there was an article in Science about 2 weeks ago where they were studying the feedback loops that are created by something like this show. And what winds up happening is that just because people are hearing about it, whether they agree or disagree, they start talking about it. And once people start talking about it, then as they get more accurate sources of information, it actually does start change. And I want to say that I'm not a big, in the nature versus nurture thing, I'm very much on the nurture side. I think that a lot of who we are narratives that are created by our social environment. And I think the COVID thing is brought up as an example. Here in the United States, there are people who do not believe that COVID really makes you sick. They don't believe that you should do anything to help protect other people. They believe it's against their rights to have to wear masks, all this weird stuff. And if you look around, the areas where that is true have the worst COVID. I have a bunch of students in Japan, so I meet with them, every day I'll be meeting with some of, there's 7,000 people died of COVID in Japan, which is about half as many people as the United States, or a third. We've got over 500,000 people that have died. And so it's just, Japan is a place where people actually cooperated. David mentioned Finland, and as I've mentioned before, that's where I got my graduate degrees. And I'm considered an honorary Finn. I jumped in the frozen lake and did all the stuff I was supposed to do. And they specifically addressed, critical thinking is a complicated thing that's kind of hard to nail down. And I've been reading some papers that, even though everyone says that we should teach it, people aren't 100% clear on exactly what it means. And sometimes the skills you teach in one place don't transfer to another. So in other words, critical thinking in some sort of ways might not be a meta category. It might be something that's specific to particular categories. So you have to reteach it for different kinds of things. And what the Finns taught is basically how to look at news and get the news into like more trusted sources. So here in the United States, people will tell me, I learned this thing and you're wrong about everything. And I say, well, show me the evidence. And they send me a link to a YouTube video of some idiot talking about his theories. And I'm like, what the heck? I won't even look at stuff like that. It rots your brain. It's not good for your head. And in the United States, there's been a strong, deliberate movement, partially from our adversaries, to degrade the belief in science and degrade the trust of sources. So, as I said, I got some information from Science Magazine. Well, I trust Science Magazine. I mean, it is it's peer reviewed, and if you can get an article in Science Magazine, that's really, really good on your academic career path. It's the top, it's right up there. And Lancet, of course, that Beth mentioned, is also just right up there. I mean, if something's in Lancet, they make mistakes. They've done stupid things. They had that stupid article about how vaccines might cause autism, and they really had egg on their faces. They rescinded it a bunch. They apologized. They made mistakes. But so where I'm kind of going with this is, we talk about governments, and there's been people on this show that are absolutely feel that the government is separate. So they say, we don't want the government taking care of our problems. We want to do it ourselves. And we don't want the government to do this. And the government is going to do this to us. And the government can't do anything right, and all these kinds of things. But what are governments? I mean, they're something we collectively imagine through unconscious rules that we developed from our culture and from our experience. And our experience, it's a story we tell ourselves. We can't touch it. You can't see it. It's a narrative. It's a story that we develop. And we need to, like, in ourselves, understand that the things that are around us, all the social things like governments and companies and all of that stuff, they're there because we make them there. They're not independent of us. They're part of our own. They're stories that we collectively make up and tell each other, and then we become actors in these stories that we invent. They're not things. You can't see a government or touch it or smell it. And so I think if you start realizing that, you start realizing you have a lot more power than you think. And that's why something like this is very valuable, because we get information and start being able to communicate with others and share information. And I want to conclude with saying that when you try to give somebody facts about something, whether it's COVID, whether it's global warming, whether it's almost anything, there's a thing that people do with their brains, which is if the society or the part of the world social world that they live in, if they're going to get more reward by disagreeing with it, their brain is going to come up with reasons why those facts are not true. And they just absolutely, the more facts that you tell them, the more entrenched they get into it's called cognitive dissonance. This comes from a guy named Fessinger who studied a cult. And in the cult, the world was supposed to end. And when the world didn't end, they believed that the reason the world didn't end was because they were so devoted to this truth that they expanded their cult and they got more people in their cult. So it's not, in a way, we need to think of stories, just like narratives, metaphors, things like that are going to work better than facts, because that's if you listen to the conservatives, anti-global warming people, anti-COVID people and stuff like that, they come down with these really simple narratives that people can hang on to. and then just use it to ignore everything else. So I don't know the solution, but necessarily, but there's a lot of work being done now on scientific communication and trying to figure out how to talk about these things in a way that that works for people. And I would love it if people were educated the way they are in Finland, to not trust anything and look at different sources and try and triangulate on what's truth. And I don't see that happening anytime soon. The Board of Education of Texas specifically banned critical thinking as part of the curriculum. So, but you can do it as an individual. Don't trust anything you read.
Thank you, Mr. Alex. What do you think? What kind of strategy actually government or corporations as well as NGO can take for reducing carbon footprint? How we can do that? What is the blueprint we can develop?
I think the number one thing is just education. Donald just mentioned having talks like this, discussions like this, trying our best to implement it in the school system. And just if we all, if there was like widespread knowledge of environmental science, environmental solutions, we wouldn't be in the crisis that we're in. Unfortunately, a lot of the misinformation and disinformation, like Donald just said, really slowed us down. I mean, I've been learning about environmental issues for at least 2 decades. I started around the year 2000, 2002, and I continue to learn more all the time. And I've said this saying before. I don't like this saying, but it's not one size shoe fits all, and that's how it goes with solutions. So the more knowledge that you have, the more education that you have, the more you're able to implement the correct solution depending on what the issue is. Because like when people ask about recycling, like how can they increase recycling, or how could they learn about recycling or support recycling? It's different in every country that I've been to, and there's not just one thing that you can say. Like here, I would tell people, I mean, earlier today, I mean, I recycled something, and even where I live here in Santa Cruz, which is supposed to be a really environmental conscious community, there's still people throwing away things in the trash can, and they just don't even know how to recycle. Last night I was trying to tell someone not to recycle those is it CFCs, the light bulbs, the long skinny ones, whatever those are called. Like, he was just throwing them in the recycling. I think that's even illegal. You're supposed to take them to the dump or, you know, home improvement store. So there's a lot of changes that we need to make, and we're not doing it fast enough. I think what Europe did was really cool, how they increased the CRV on every single every beverage container, or most of them, that you purchase. So instead of paying 5 cents like they do here in California, 5 or 10 cents, you pay 25 cents. So that gives you that incentive to return it to get more money. And it was really cool. For those of you that don't know, in Europe, you pay more money initially, but then you have these containers that have more CRV value, and you could actually take them to the stores. They got the automated machines. You just drop it in, and it gives you that credit on a receipt that you can then take into the store and spend. It's just a really good system. And when I was there, I did not see homeless people recycling cans and bottles. I saw middle class and upper middle class people taking their recycling beverages. So I think we need to duplicate what they're doing in Europe. It's just a really cool, and other places I'm sure are doing something similar. I think we also need to, when we're buying products, we need to look to see if it's made from recycled material. That's a way that we can vote with our money and support the circular economy system of recyclable material. And before we do get rid of something, again, like Beth was talking about. So before we recycle, it's good to think about, well, can I sell it and make money and then put that towards planting trees or doing something good? Can I donate it to a nonprofit or someone that's going to sell it? Can I give it to a homeless person that they might use it? Is there a way that I can, is it like paper or something that's non-toxic that can be composted? Can it be upcycled into something new so it doesn't end up in a landfill? And then you think about recycling. And the very very last, you think about throwing it in the trash. Now, I might have missed some of those steps, but you got to go through that thought process before you get rid of everything, so we could transition towards a circular economy, so stuff doesn't end up, polluting the environment or in the landfill. So again, education, I think, is really important. Here in the United States, Texas, is where a lot of the books are produced or made or written, that is incorporated into the educational system here. And I think it's difficult to change all of the books where the material is coming from. So I've now been a guest speaker at 27 middle school, high school, college, and university classes talking about these issues. So if since teachers can't change out the books, because of the education system, I would try to get good guest speakers into the shows. Into the schools. So I created an environmental Facebook group. It's called Enviralize. I created it about 2 years ago. It has 8,500 members. We're always talking about environmental solutions. And I was just looking at, pinned at the top of one of the posts is just this conversation that we're having because it's so important. It's how to lower your carbon footprint. And it was a poll where everyone voted. And I don't have it in front of me right now, but I think up in the top of the list was, being vegan, driving an electric car, don't have kids. And so there was, it showed the different things they can do. Some of the top ones had 100 votes, and then, around 180, and so it went down. So people are voting on what they thought. It's similar to what Beth mentioned with Project Drawdown. What can we do that reduces our carbon footprint the most? Now, not only did I not drive a car for 7 years, I lived off grid for 2 years. I'm really anti-AC. I hardly ever use AC because it takes so much energy. That's also listed on the Drawdown. I also try to never use ice. A lot of energy goes down into making ice. So I just try to do everything that I can. So I've been a super hardcore environmentalist for like 2 decades. Now, people criticize me. Oh, you flew to this country, or oh, you're driving. And so I spent like maybe 5 hours. I made a list of about 200 things that I commented in the comment section on this video. Now you can go through and you can see every single thing that I've did, probably about 200 things to lower my carbon footprint. Now it's not just recycling or not driving. There are so many other things that we can all do. And it's my list is really critiqued. I wrote it about 6 months ago. I didn't even have a phone for a year because of the environmental impact of having a phone. So please check out that link that's in the comment if you want to go more into detail. And one of the things that I find difficult is our society. Everyone, as you've seen, is offended about all these different subjects, all these different things that you try to, whether you're like, please don't be sexist, please don't be racist. Like, people get offended with everything, different things that we try to, shift our society to make, our world a better place. So as far as environmental issues, over the last few decades, I've found if I say, someone nicely, please don't litter, like that's so, bad for them, they get mad at me. So I can say like, please don't eat so much food, like you're just like consuming food, like that obviously offends people. So if you tell people, like you're wasting so much food, those are resources, it offends people. So all these different things Beth has experienced trying to get people to, eat less meat. People get mad, they get defensive, they get offended. They just want to eat a lot of meat and resources and all this. So all of these different things that we're trying to like, nicely ask, or I go out with a megaphone all the time. When I see crowds of people like sitting outside of a restaurant, I yell, please talk about climate change. I do it all the time. So I'm offending people. We're in an emergency. So one of the topics that's probably going to offend a lot of people on this show, I'm sorry, the human population is increasing. We have to have less children. If you want to learn how to lower your carbon footprint, have like 4 kids instead of 7. Have 1 kid instead of 2. I mean, I chose not to have kids about 15 years ago when I realized that we're in a climate emergency and it's going to kill billions of people. If we all keep having kids and children and living outside of our means, it's just going to continue to cause us, we're not going to get out of this crisis. So yeah, we could be vegan. We could, use less AC. We can, try to, not drive lifted trucks. But if we all just like chose to have less kids, you got to think of the individual environmental impact of every single person. And I'm not just talking about having less kids in like India and China, or where there's a lot of people. We need to have less kids in America, where the environmental impact of every single person is like 10 or like 50 times greater than some of these developing countries. So I'm just I'm really like anti-kid. We're in a climate emergency. Billions of people are dying. We're not going to get past this by just recycling and going vegan. Like, we need to like really look in ourselves, and we're like, wow, yeah, we're like a disease spreading around the planet, and we all just need to practice safe sex and have birth control and think about the children we're leaving in this earth. It's not just their environmental impact, it's also like we don't want them to suffer and die. Like, we're already seeing major superstorms and disasters around the world that are killing people. So what's it going to be like if you brought a child into this world right now in 50 years, 80 years? I mean, I'm not going to subject a child to that. And that's my opinion, and it hurts people's feelings, but I'm never going to bring a kid into this world. There's too many people on this earth, and I'm not going to subject someone to suffering on this planet that we're destroying until we figure out long-term solutions. So I'm going to leave it back to the discussion.
Thank you.
To the group.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Mr. Brenda, Madam Brenda. Sorry. So yeah.
I'm almost done. You can go. You don't have to.
Very interesting conversations and points there. So I just wanted to maybe add on to the question that was asked earlier on about integrating this into the curriculum. And I know that it has been answered. So just to add on to that, I think it is very, very important. And I think it is important that it is done at an early age. So what we have seen is that this, or at least where I am, is that education around climate change, the impacts, what is causing it, what needs to be done, it is done maybe at a higher education level. It is done in corporates for people that are employed. It is done by governments to those officials. And then you are leaving out those people that know nothing about it, they do not have access to formal education. It leaves out those kids that are growing with those behaviors. And by the time you're trying to educate them, this thing is already entrenched in them and they don't understand what you're trying to say when you say don't litter. So I think we need to be very intentional about the education. If we're saying this stress is this big and the threat is so severe, we need to be intentional about educating our kids about it, educating our communities about it. Somebody asked the question around, how do we do it for smaller kids? I liked, there was somebody who was on your show a while ago talking about those SDG goals. And then he was talking about a game that he has introduced for people to start to implement this in their daily lives. We know that kids are addicted to electronic devices and, gaming is their thing. Why not turn an education like this or an awareness like this into something like that, into a game of sort, so that they understand the implication, they understand what it is, so that, they can start to, it makes it easy to leave this and operationalize it. So I honestly still think that where we are, especially in Africa, we still have a long way to go. Like Alex was saying earlier on, a simple thing like littering, depending on where you are at, it might be frowned upon, or somebody might be excited that you are talking against littering. If I'm currently based in Johannesburg. If I go to Sandton, which is where the business district is, if I litter, it will be frowned upon. But 5 kilometers down the line, if I see somebody littering and I say something about it, they be like, you think you better. It's seen as a middle class and a higher class thing. So it's no longer about the environment, it's more about class. So I think, we need to do a lot more from that point of view. So from a corporate and government point of view, it's one thing to have policies and processes, but it's another if these are not enforced. Reverend Beth made an example of COVID earlier on to say, people's behavior changed immediately because they could see the risk, they could see the threat if they don't follow the protocols. But it wasn't just don't go out, you'll die. It was don't go out, you'll die. But if you do go out, you're going to be punished for going out. That is why we had lockdowns. So there were lockdowns, there were people that were enforcing rules if you do breach those lockdown protocols. Why not do something similar? Why not say there's a policy around climate change? You need to recycle, you need to reuse, you need to do this. If you do not do it, then this will happen to you. Because something as simple as separating your trash, it is a big deal where I'm at. So it is yes, it is practiced in big corporates. And I think I honestly, this is my personal opinion, think it's just from a reputational point of view, there's no commitment to it. So I think we need to do a lot more to understand what is this thing? What are the implications to me, to everybody else if I don't do it? And what are the opportunities if I do it? There was mention of cost savings if I reuse. There was a mention of cost savings if I don't buy a new car and use that old model car. So those things don't come through when we start talking about this thing. We're just talking about this thing that is very fancy that people cannot relate to. So I think we need to bring it down a little bit so that people can start understanding it.
Thank you. Like I directly want to go for the concluding remarks for today's sessions, but I have a question: how we can develop better policy for reduce carbon footprint? I want to start from Madam Viva, then Professor David, then Madam Beth, then Professors Donalds, Alex, and Brenda. Yes, I want to start from.
Okay. I think the best thing that we can do is to just continue remembering that the science that comes out and how it's motivated, it's primarily motivated to help society. So considering that source, being at the cutting edge of some of those things, one of the questions that I see coming up is, how do you tell someone if you don't do it, it's going to cause damage? With respect to my technology and area of knowledge, the more we emit, the more we damage the natural sewer system of the planet. And we do have a natural sewer system, and it is headed by the hydroxyl radical. When the sun shines on water, it splits it and forms into the hydroxyl radical, and it is the main driving force behind our fresh air. So as we continue to not succeed in lowering our emissions, we're starting to damage the sewer system that we rely on for fresh air. So I would say that, to integrate the consequences and have people learn about things like the natural sewer system of the earth. It can be taught in geochemistry classes at different levels and introducing it slowly so that this compound was actually not well understood until 1993. So scientifically, it came along late in the game, but it is a very powerful indicator of how well we're doing when we have a continuing increase of methane, which is removed by the hydroxyl radical normally quite successfully. So if we have an increasing level of methane growing in the atmosphere, that should tell us that we are not succeeding in lowering our emissions. So that is a direct indicator. It's a red light, green light type of thing. And those type of real indicators are what we should rely on as much as possible as we all try to figure out how to have our lives.
Thank you. Professor David.
Your question fits quite well into what I was thinking about for closing remarks, and I want to say that I feel very lucky to be able to follow my previous commenter here on comments today, because much of what we have to say seemed to be so well aligned. So policy to reduce carbon footprint. The organizations that I work with are all about policy and trying to promote policy. But we realize that many times what we have to do is work to incentivize people to do the quote unquote the right thing. We talked about this a little bit earlier in today's conversation, whether that be with recycling, but there can be other ways to incentivize people as well. Much of today's conversation has been on what we can do individually, corporately to reduce. And I want to say right off that I think that's extremely important, but that's not, from my view, the total situation. The shirt that I'm wearing today, I don't know how well it shows on camera, is a shirt that I bought in New Zealand. It's number 8 wire. Looks a little bit like the infinity symbol, and I like it from that standpoint. But the reason New Zealand and number 8 wire comes into this conversation is this is a national symbol of ingenuity. New Zealanders, as you may know, are called Kiwis, and this represents Kiwi ingenuity. Be presented with a problem, and then look at doing all the things that you can do to solve that problem. So keeping our individual carbon footprint down, as I said, is an imperative. Keeping it down corporately is an imperative. But then I think mitigation is where we're at going forward. I'm going to put a reference in the private chat, Sharif. This goes to a book called the Transhumanism Handbook that was put out in 2019. And it's a series of essays, writings from different transhumanist authors. It's available at a very modest price from Amazon, either in Kindle or paperback version. And if that's not appropriate for some of the audience that maybe would have economic reasons for that, let me know, because I can contact the author of chapter 54, which is all about remediation of these particular issues that we're talking about. I'm also putting in the private chat the bio of the person that wrote it. He's a fellow director in the Transhumanist Party. And we look at using science and engineering to solve problems, science, engineering, technology. And then my particular area that I'm most focused on is doing that in the health environment. And clearly, carbon footprint, global warming, climate change is definitely a human and larger than human problem. So what I want to say is that this article that he talks about has to do with, once we've done everything that we can do, and if there is still more that can be done, what are responsible ways that we can go about mitigating, reducing the negative impacts to humanity and to the other creatures that we share this planet with. His particular idea has to do with geoengineering. When I talk about this to some people, there is a fear of the unknown. There is a fear of doing something new. But I think these are things that require discussion as well. Realizing that everything that we do in making our choices, our daily choices about carbon footprint, have positives and negatives Any kind of remediation or mitigation also has positive or negatives, and we need to have rational discussions about what we can do. So once again, I'm very glad to have followed my colleague today with her discussion of a way that we can go about improving, as well as improving the environment, as well as the things that we can do to reduce the risk to the environment from a level. So let's keep all these issues on the table. Let's keep rational conversation on the table. Let's keep critical thinking on the table. Let's keep education on the table. And let's do it all. Thank you, Sharif, for having me here today.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Madam Beth.
Thank you. Yes. So again, I want to emphasize that my expertise is in the area of diet, and what I know from all the research I do is that we need to do all of the solutions. So I don't talk about diet because I think it's the silver bullet. There is no silver bullet. We need to do all of the solutions. But I will bring in, you asked the question about policy, and I will bring in that there are lots and lots of policies that can be done. And I did link to a a page that lists policies for food and agriculture for all the areas of food and agriculture. And this list was compiled by a group that was in the United States that was the People's Green New Deal Working Group. And they invited submissions from organizations all over the United States, and some world organizations contributed as well. And they came up with lots and lots of solutions to, it was an effort that looked at across the board at all the emissions. But Eat for the Earth and dozens of other organizations contributed ways that dietary policy can be implemented. And what happens when we talk about diet, Donald, you talk about how people don't want to change. And I think, Alex, you were talking about how if you go tell people what to do, they don't want to do it. If you start talking about diet, people get prickly, right? They get prickly because of something called cognitive dissonance, right? So like just my presence in the room as a vegan, if people know I'm a vegan, people are going to get defensive, because one of the things is that when we're doing something and we know that we shouldn't be doing it, that we know that it's not the best thing to do, is we find a way to rationalize, we find a way to make it right in our minds. So I think it's really important that we emphasize more out there doing our educational work, that it is important for governments to take action and that there are policies that can be adopted. Because if you're adopting policies, I'm not talking about mandatory dietary policies, but there's very important, crucial things that governments can do on the dietary front. And but we also need to educate from the bottom up, as I was saying earlier. Governments will not act until the people are ready. Governments are not going to make super unpopular decisions for the most part. So we need critical mass. So we need to educate people. But I'll share just a few of the policies that are on the site that I mentioned. So for instance, one really huge thing is government procurement policies. Helsinki, Finland made a decision to increase their plant-based purchases and decrease meat and animal product purchases by 50% for all municipal and school functions. Okay, the city of Oakland school district, they decided to cut animal product purchases by 30%. They saw a huge decrease in their costs, in their water use, and in their carbon footprint. Okay, so these things can be done. In the state of California, there's a bill right now, AB 479, which is incentivizing schools that increase plant foods on the menu. So giving them grants to be able to get the training they need, or new equipment, or somebody to help them develop menus. So there's things that governments can do in the procurement area and to incentivize. Right now in my country, animal product production is subsidized. Okay, there's direct and indirect subsidies, including the indirect subsidies of, like the toll on the environment, on human health, on our healthcare system, but also in terms of direct subsidies, payments to farmers. So even though dairy consumption has gone down, dairy farmers continue to produce as much or more dairy, and it's stockpiled at great expense by the government or given out in food programs. So instead of incentivizing these production of foods that are harming the environment, let's tax them. You'll see a huge shift if we start taxing instead of subsidizing, or at least take the subsidies away. Dietary guidelines. The Canadian government did a really great job with dietary guidelines. Look at their guidelines. Their plate looks like the plate that the Eat Lancet Commission designed. It looks like the plate that everybody in the world could eat. We could grow to 10 billion people, and we could still live here. We could avert climate catastrophe and all of the other environmental crises that are going on if we go to a very small animal product consumption. So look at there, it's a plate. It has half fruits and vegetables on it. This is what they tell people to eat, Canadians to eat. Half fruits and vegetables at every meal. Then they've got or not at every meal necessarily, but over the course of the day, a quarter of the plate is whole grains. And then a quarter of the plate is all of the protein foods, and they include animal proteins and plant proteins. So meat, dairy, fish, eggs, legumes, nuts, seeds, all in 1/4 of the plate. They took away that milk glass that is there on the American plate simply because of the influence of the dairy lobby. We don't need to drink milk every day. And in fact, most people around the world are lactose intolerant. So, you know, these policies that are colonialistic, that have corrupted these indigenous diets, by and large, are largely plant food diets. But we have had these huge industries that have been allowed to get their profit at the expense of human health, at the expense of our environmental sustainability. So let's change that up. I'll just name a couple more. You can restrict marketing of foods that hurt the environment. You can put a carbon equivalent label on foods. Governments can do that. That's a policy they can do, so people are making an informed choice. Oh, do I want to buy this beef or this chicken or these beans? Which chicken is better than beef, as Alex mentioned, but go buy some beans. You know, it's just a fraction of chicken. We can reorient. We can give these big, huge companies that are growing, or no, let's take that one back. We can give these farmers, these small farmers that are raising chickens, give them grants to convert to a mushroom farm, right? Mm-hmm. There's so many things that can be done, and that link that I referenced has more. So I think in terms of closing comments, what I want to say is just like we need to think like we're in a movement, because we are. This is a movement. So we need to think about movement building strategies. And in movements, you go for the low-hanging fruit. So you don't try to clobber those people. I'll use the COVID example. Those people that are storming the supermarket without their masks, or those anti-vaxxers or whatever, you don't try to convert those. You go to the people that are closest to your cause, and you continue to build the circle of people who understand the importance of this. And then you also, so you build critical mass, and you also, in movements, confront the problem at the level of policy and decision makers. And the other thing that I want to say is that we need to deal with this cognitive dissonance gingerly. So not confront people so much as invite them into a conversation, listen to what they have to say, and share what we have to say. And finally, just as it's a repetition, but just if people take nothing away from what I've said today except this one fact, I think this is the really important thing for us to take away, is that regardless of what we do on the transportation and energy fronts, which are important and we need to deal with them, that if we don't also change global human diets in the parts of the world that are eating more animal products than are our fair share, that we will not avert climate catastrophe. We're already in catastrophe, but we will not be able to turn this thing around. But we can turn it around. We still probably have 6 or 7 years in which we have to turn it around. We probably have 6 or 7 years. And finally, like the COVID example, it wasn't just, thank you so much, Brenda, for bringing in COVID and how people were changing, because, you know, they knew that there could be very dire consequences to them. But to me, what was really hopeful about that experience was that most of us, myself included, I'm not worried about getting COVID. I'm super healthy. It's not going to hurt me. But I changed my behavior because I care about the community. And what I saw was a world that cared enough about their communities that we radically altered our behavior because we cared about the people around us in our communities. And that's what we need for this climate crisis, is we need to rally people so that they care enough about the continued habitation of the earth that we are willing to change our behaviors, and that we can force governments to do the same.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Professor David. Professor David.
Yes, okay. Well, I think that Beth did a good job of talking about her specific area really well, and I appreciate the comment that we do need to work all across the board, and I think that's what we need to stay focused on. But that doesn't mean that we don't delve into specific areas of expertise where we have them. One of the things about your selection of panelists on these calls that I really like is that while we complement each other, we don't all come from the same point of view and we don't have the same passions. And those are all good. We need all of this. And I'll continue to say that. And I have my passions as well. However, I try to default to the overarching views of all the things that we can do. So, Beth, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor Donald. Professor Donald.
Had to unmute myself there. Okay. Well, the question of policy, I think that one of the policies, and Beth brought this up, that is incredibly important is the way that the governments have been structuring the financial incentives. So for a long time, a lot of us have been really, really into the idea of a carbon tax. And that means that at the well, where the fuel comes from, whether it's gas or mine, coal, or whatever, you tax that carbon, you tax the resource based on how much carbon there is, which is the opposite of what we're doing. We're actually paying states like Texas to drill oil. So in other words, we're actually paying, we're doing the opposite. We've got a carbon subsidy instead of a carbon tax. And some European countries are starting to institute this. As I say, I lived in Finland, and that's the one that I know the best. But the price of gasoline there is like 3 times what it is here. I mean, so there's a strong disincentive to drive expensive cars. I want to mention one thing that's just a little off the topic. I lived in Silicon Valley and I loved the public transportation. There are areas that are very difficult to get to, but I've been to the airport and back in Palo Alto many, many, many times. And I lived in Palo Alto. I didn't have to drive anywhere. Everything was convenient. If I wanted to go to the city, I hopped on the train. It beats driving. It takes 2 hours to drive because the traffic's so bad. But on the train, you can even have a glass of wine while you're taking this comfortable trip to San Francisco. The trick is that there are areas that are not very well served. And so what you do is you take Uber to a central transportation point. So when I go to San Francisco myself, like the concerts, I'll take the 17 bus to the Uddin station and then just take the train to San Francisco. And it's and the Silicon Valley about 2 or 3 years ago voted overwhelmingly to increase their taxes to enhance the public transportation system. So they're building a ferry in Redwood City. They're building, they're expanding BART all the way to San Jose in both directions. They're just doing an incredible amount of stuff. And that's an example of when people have a will, they can make a huge difference. But I think that people make decisions emotionally, not rationally. And that's been shown by neuroscience. I recommend the book Descartes' Error by Antonio Damasio, who's a neuroscientist, who talks about how ultimately we have to have a feeling that the decision we're making is the right one, no matter how much rational information we get. There's still going to be some point where where the decision has to be emotional. And so agreeing with what Beth said is that when we're trying to talk to people about it, it's important to get into like what it is, what their feelings are, because the anti-mask people and things like that, what's happening with them is all the people around them think they're cool for doing what they're doing. and they get praise for saying certain sentences. I mean, if you listen to really conservative media, sometimes it's like they only say 50 things, and they just say it over and over and over and over again. And then if you say one of those 50 things to another person in your in-group, they say, oh, you're so smart, you said this wonderful one of the 50 things that we say. And you can't, as she said, cognitive dissonance just makes it basically impossible for them to be able to get out of that. So the way to do it is to just really ask them, well, you know, that's great. Well, that's really interesting, and treat them like that they're that they actually know something, and they've got. And if you can get them to the point where you ask them a question they can't answer in a friendly way, that's the kind of way that you're going to get them to start changing, because they're going to start, you get them to the point where they start saying, well, you know, maybe I'm not 100% sure about X, Y, or Z. And then, you know, drop it. Don't beat them up about it. I mean, that's the way to do it. But as long as having a quote, nice car, unquote, as long as having a big house, all of those things are status and make you more important and valuable in the eyes of other people. It's not going to really change, I mean, for those people. But it seems that we are starting to develop a society or for a lot of people where it's cool to be more of a minimalist. It's cool to start not creating as much damage. And if you go outside of the United States, and again, Finland, they're extremely high rating on their environmental. They take very, very, very good care of their lakes and forests and everything else like that. And as I said, even in Silicon Valley, we're starting to do that here. So I'm not sure that government policies like the COVID lockdowns work necessarily in the long term, because they didn't really have lockdowns in Thailand and Japan and countries, Taiwan and Thailand and Japan and countries that have been very, very successful. That's not 100% true. They just recently had a bit of a crisis in Japan where they locked down. But the point of the matter is it's voluntary. Like where I live in Santa Cruz, people voluntarily wear masks and everybody wears masks. But if you went to a Walmart in Fresno or something like that, you know, people would be slugging the people trying to get in without masks and stuff like that. So the government policy isn't necessarily like direct intervention, but things like carbon taxes and analyzing the subsidies where we're actually paying people to create pollution and create damage, those can all change, and they should, but it's a matter of being aware of it. So having conversations like this and having conversations with people is key to making that change. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Mr. Alex.
Yes. So Donald and Beth and we all live in Santa Cruz. And what happened was a group of maybe about 15 or 20 people got together and they kind of pushed their way into a local supermarket without face masks to cause a disruption. But unfortunately, there was elderly people there and children there, and our entire community is really upset with them. So some other volunteers and myself, we created a team. We actually now know the exact vehicle the person that organized that drives. We know his license plate. We know where he lives. And we're going to give all that out to the public so we can go out front of his house. And we've been watching where he goes. And I actually saw him the other day and he had a flat tire, and there's a video online where people were trying to egg him. I mean, there's a lot of people in our community upset with him and they don't know how to contact him. He'll just show up in random places. So there's teams, getting together, trying to figure out how to stop this guy, because he's continuing to put my loved ones at risk, Beth's family and friends, Donald's family and friends. And it's just setting a really bad example, and it's just spreading misinformation and disinformation. So we're not sure what route we're going to go with this, but we now have a lot of information on this guy, David, as Beth knows. So to answer the question, sorry for the distraction. That's just another project that we're working on. To answer the question, politics. So how we now have a new administration. You know, in the United States, this is really exciting because a lot of stuff's going to start changing fast. So there's two different ways to solve all these environmental issues we're dealing with, different ways to implement solutions. One is through educational platforms like this, and we get all these individuals to slowly change, sometimes change a little bit, or it's just going to the political level, which I think is something that we also have to do. And it's equally as effective, you know, depending on what issue you're addressing. So that's where we get someone into office, like someone that believes in climate change. You know, a lot of stuff will change fast. Someone that's against the fossil fuel industry. I was a supporter of Bernie Sanders. He didn't get into office, but we got Joe Biden. Thankfully, he believes in climate change and he's implementing some of these solutions. So here in California, I've also had the opportunity to go right down to the office of you know, some of our politicians and speak directly with them and hear what they're doing to implement new strategies and solutions that are going to help our community, both you know, at the county level and the city level. So I've taken my individual initiative to go down and speak with them and, you know, just ask what they're doing. So politics is very important when it comes down to this. Now, one of the ways that we can explain, or I can just you know, say, like, okay, so in an area where there's no littering fines, or a country, people are going to litter if they're not, you know, if it's not criticized and, you know, there's no fines, everyone's going to litter. But if you get a fine in place like they have here in California, I don't know, it's probably like a few $1,000s, people aren't going to litter as often, or if they do, they're going to try not to get caught. So thankfully, there's not as much litter here, but Donald just mentioned, I think, Fresno. You go to Fresno, there is just so much litter there. It's horrible. So I think you know, fines and those fines and, you know, regulations and laws being enforced is important. So just here, this is an example. So there's littering fines and it solves a lot of littering. So another thing that we have in place, you know, in different places around the world, is smog regulations. There's different regulations for different counties and different, you know, states and different countries. Here in California, I believe the smog levels are stricter than some of the other, you know, East Coast states. So that means overall, collectively, our carbon emissions and our carbon footprint is going to be lower than some of the other states. So when we have smog regulations in place, littering fines, that helps. Another thing that is the strictest here in California is VOC levels in paints and toxic stuff. So VOC stands for volatile organic compounds or volatile organic chemicals. I don't remember. I think compounds. So not sure. Okay, so anyways, those are regulations in California, and that's like really low. So if you get like paint from a store and it shows how much VOCs it has, I actually looked online, and California levels are the lowest in all of the states in California. So that's something the government put in place that kept toxic stuff out of our paint. Same thing with, you know, how smog has helped and fines, and we could do the same thing with recycling. The government can change the CRV, or they could just even make you know, recycling laws, and it changes everything across the board. You know how we solved the ozone problem? You know, the huge hole in the ozone was from regulations. You know, we made regulations on the chemical that was causing that issue, that problem, and we solved that, and now we, you know, our ozone has had a chance to rebuild. So I think that policy and politics and who we vote into office is really important when it comes to that. Cruise ships and some of these freight ships and whatever, like, they don't have a lot of policies because of international waters. I hope that that could be solved in the future. So I wanted to mention some of the things. My battery is low, but hopefully my headset's still working. So I try to vote with my money as much as I can. This shirt is Prana. It's a really good environmental company, but it was also from a secondhand store. So it's a really good company that I support. These are made with hemp and bamboo. I needed some headset. I liked my wireless one better, but again, I tried, and I do use this all the time. This pencil doesn't have paint on it, and it's made from FSC lumber. Certified lumber stands for Forest Stewardship Council, where they plant trees. Same thing with my notepad right here. I got my reusable water container that I've had for at least 2 years. So I'm doing everything that I can, voting with my money. I don't like buying a lot of stuff, but when I do, I try to buy good quality things. And if I had extra money, I would buy healthy organic food. And I think that's important. And my girlfriend's vegan. I'm probably 95%, vegetarian, vegan. So I know those are important. Again, it's good to waste, as little food as possible. I think just it's hard for people to be vegan or drive electric car, but we could all just waste less food. And I find it disgusting, the people here in America that waste food when there's people starving in so many countries around the world, and just how much food we waste. And it's not just the companies, the corporations, the restaurants, the schools. It's also just the individuals are wasting a lot of food. So I wish people would work on that. And one of the last things that I can say when it comes to voting with your money and how to lower your carbon footprint, just please don't buy chemicals. There's like no chemicals you need. Like I don't use any chemical that I can think of, like other than maybe oil in my car. I mean, I don't use bleach. Everything that I can't think of chemicals that I buy. For some reason, people think they need all these chemicals to clean everything or to spray on the plants and the bugs and this and that. Like, I just think that if all of us bought less chemicals, it would also drastically reduce our individual environmental impact and carbon footprint. That's all. Thank you very much for another great discussion.
Thank you. Madam Brenda. Madam Brenda. Can you unmute yourself, Madam Brenda?
Brenda.
Can you hear me, Madam Brenda?
She's working on it. It's always that mute.
Madam Brenda, can you hear me? Madam Brenda, can you hear me?
Once again, thank you very much, Sharif.
Okay.
Yes, hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. What's your concluding remarks for today?
So, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the opportunity for inviting me here. And thanks to the panelists. I've learned so much today. And I think, yes. So I think from my view, there's still a lot of education that needs to happen. I know personally that I'll benefit from that, and people in my community that will benefit from that. And as you know, Sharif, at TEFs, which is the organization that I'm volunteering at, we welcome all of these transdisciplinary discussions and ideas, sharing of ideas, especially where it comes to educating people to make sure that the future is the future that we want. It is a better future for all of us. So I will encourage anyone who can provide the type of education to our audiences there to also share this information with us. But as far as Africa is concerned, in terms of climate change, I must say that, we still have a long way to go, but there are areas that are really, really doing well. As far as there is concerned, you can see where they are going. There is implementation by some of the corporates, by some individuals, but we need it not to be siloed. We need a combined effort so that it can multiply that much faster. An example of one of the countries that are doing very well is Rwanda. As you know, Kigali, their capital city, is one of the cleanest and one of the most environmentally friendly in the whole of Africa. There is 1 out of 54 countries in the African continent, followed by other countries, but in small pockets. So I think if it can happen, it will happen. All it needs is commitment, it needs discipline, and everything will follow suit. So that's it from me, and thank you so much once again.
Thank you for joining today's sessions. And actually, World Talent Economy Forums, we are doing research, we are developing different kind of conference and summit, as well as we are working with different organizations in Asia Pacific. Hopefully, your collaborations and contributions can add more values for youth communities and development of the youth community. So, any of your collaborations and partnership, we are open for that, and we are open for developing more training and developments and research based work. So thank you everyone for joining today's sessions. Hopefully we can invite you more sessions. Actually from the May we want to start our continuous summit and everything. We already develop our plan and everything. Those who want to join in our conference and summit, they can join, and it will be very helpful for the global collaboration. Thank you everyone for joining today's session. Thank you for your time and everything, and especially I want to give thanks to our audience. Thank you, and our honorable speakers. Thank you.
Thank you.